You'd think that it would be really hard to have a single favorite number greater than 1,000,000 because there are so many of them. But watching Matt Parker's video on favorite mega numbers reminded me of a day some years ago when I first taught exponentiation to my son, Andrew. As a math major and homeschool teacher, we always followed all sorts of tangents. He was already a fan of really big numbers and had invented the term silly-illion to be any ridiculously big number. Exponentiation is repeated multiplication. I showed him how anything raised to the exponent 1 is just the number itself. Then we talked about squares and cubes and so on. Because he was really fond of big numbers, one of the things we talked about was what happens when you write a stack of exponents. There are two ways you might have been able to interpret this. A to the b to the c could have been understood to mean a to the b to the exponent c. But I showed Andrew how this was just the same as a to the exponent b times c, which seems like you'd be wasting the exponentiation operator because you could have just used multiplication here. Instead, the accepted interpretation of a to the b to the c is that you work it out starting from the right side, or if you will, from the top. That is, to calculate a to the b to the c, you first calculate b to the c, and then raise a to that exponent. To show Andrew how much bigger that might be, I started with a small, simple stack, 2 to the 3 to the 4. If you start at the bottom, 2 cubed is 8. So 2 to the 3 to the 4 would be 8 to the 4, or 4,096, which is pretty big, but the same thing as 2 to the exponent 3 times 4, which is 2 to the 12th. However, if you start at the top, first you calculate 3 to the 4, and then raise 2 to that exponent. 3 to the 4 is 81. So 2 to the 3 to the 4 is 2 to the 81, which equals 2 septillion, 417 sextillion, 851 quintillion, 639 quadrillion, 229 trillion, 258 billion, 349 million, 412,352. Just a smidgen bigger than 4,096. To give Andrew a real feel for the power of exponentiation, we talked about some other pretty big numbers, like 10 to the 100, which is called a googol and is a 1 followed by 100 zeros. We talked about how big that number was for a while, and then I thought I'd blow his mind by describing a zootzootplex, which is 10 to the googol, or 10 to the 10 to the 100. In a burst of mathematical creativity, Andrew almost instantly came up with what is obviously now my favorite mega number. Take a zootzootplex and raise it to the exponent, a zootzootplex minus 1, raised to the exponent, a zootzootplex minus 2, raised to the exponent, a zootzootplex minus 3, and continue like this until you get to the final exponent of 1. Talk about having your mind blown. I was astonished at how big this number would be. I mean, a googol is already more than the number of atoms in the universe. After we talked about it for a while, I asked Andrew what it should be called. In the way that only a 4-year-old can, he deadpanned, a zootzootplex, as if it couldn't be anything else, truly taking the concept of a silly-illion to the limit.